The dust never settled anymore in Haven's Rest. Every time the wind tried to clear the air, another group of Dominator ships would roar overhead, stirring up the red dirt that coated everything on New Terra. Alex watched from behind the cracked window of what used to be the community center, now converted into a distribution point for the daily food rations. 3 months had passed since the invasion, and the 12-year-old had learned to read the patterns. Morning patrols at 8 sharp. Midday sweeps through the residential areas. Evening lockdown when the twin suns disappeared behind the mountains. The aliens were nothing if not predictable. Alex, come away from there. Grandmother Ruth's voice carried the weight of constant worry. She sat at a makeshift table, carefully dividing their meager food supplies into equal portions for the next 3 days. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, not from age, but from the stress that had aged her 10 years and 3 months. They're just walking by. Grandma, Alex replied softly, but he stepped back from the window anyway. His little sister Lucy looked up from her drawing on the floor. She had been sketching the same thing for weeks now, their old house before the Dominators came, complete with the flower garden their mother had tended and the swing their father had built. The Dominators confused Alex. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick gray skin that looked like it could stop bullets. Their eyes glowed red in their deep-set sockets, and their mouths held rows of sharp teeth that they showed whenever they wanted humans to move faster. Everything about them screamed danger, yet Alex found himself wondering what they were really like underneath all that armor and attitude. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed on the concrete. The patrol was closer than usual today. Alex counted them by sound, 4 Dominators moving in their standard diamond formation. He had learned to recognize each patrol group by the rhythm of their steps. This was Commander Brutak's unit. The commander had a slight limp from some old battle, making his right foot land harder than his left. Lucy crawled over to Alex and tugged on his sleeve. "Why don't they ever smile?" she whispered. Alex knelt down to her level. "Maybe they forgot how," he said, brushing a strand of her dark hair from her face. "Or maybe nobody ever taught them." "That's silly," Lucy giggled quietly. "Everyone knows how to smile. Even the dogs back home could smile." Through the thin walls, they could hear Mrs. Park from next door trying to calm her crying baby. The infant had been born just 2 weeks after the invasion, and the poor thing seemed to sense the fear that hung over the settlement like a thick blanket. Alex had noticed that human babies cried more since the Dominators arrived, as if they could feel their parents' stress. Grandmother Ruth finished her food counting and looked at her grandchildren with tired eyes. "Alex, I need you to take Lucy to the market today. Mrs. Chen has some medicine for her cough, and old Pete said he might have found some clean water filters." Alex nodded. The daily trips to the market were dangerous but necessary. The Dominators allowed limited movement during daylight hours, but they watched everything. Any sign of organization or resistance met with swift punishment. 3 weeks ago, they had taken away Mr. Davis just for asking too many questions about the missing adults. "Can we visit the old playground on the way back?" Lucy asked hopefully. The playground had been one of the first casualties of the occupation. The Dominators had torn down the swings and slides, claiming they were potential weapons. In their place stood a gray monitoring tower that tracked every movement in the surrounding area. But Lucy still remembered how it used to be. "We'll see," Alex said, which was his way of saying yes without getting Grandmother Ruth worried. As they prepared to leave, Alex caught sight of himself in the broken mirror by the door. He looked older than 12 now, though he could not explain why. His brown eyes held something that had not been there before the invasion. Not fear exactly, but understanding. He had seen things in the past 3 months that children should not see. Yet somehow he felt more ready for the world than he had before. The market sat in the center of Haven's Rest, surrounded by the concrete barriers the Dominators had erected to control foot traffic. Only one entrance and one exit with guards at each point. Alex took Lucy's hand as they approached the checkpoint. The guard today was a young Dominator, probably new to occupation duty. His movements were stiff and nervous, unlike the seasoned veterans who moved with practiced ease. When he saw Alex and Lucy approaching, his red eyes flared brighter, and he gripped his weapon tighter. Alex slowed his pace and made eye contact with the guard. Instead of looking down or away as most humans did, he simply watched the alien with calm curiosity. The Dominator shifted uncomfortably under the boy's steady gaze. unsure how to interpret this lack of proper fear response. "Papers," the guard growled in broken human language. Alex handed over their identification cards without breaking eye contact. "Good morning," he said pleasantly as if greeting a neighbor. The guard's head tilted slightly. In all his training, no scenario had covered humans who treated armed occupiers like friendly acquaintances. He processed their papers quickly and waved them through, eager to end the unsettling interaction. As they entered the market, Lucy squeezed Alex's hand. "You're not scared of them, are you?" Alex considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "They're just people too, Lucy. Different kind of people, but still people. And people can always choose to be better." Behind them, the young Dominator guard watched them disappear into the crowd, still puzzling over the human boy who had looked at him without fear or hatred, but with something far more disturbing: genuine interest in who he might be beneath his armor and weapons. The midday heat made the air shimmer above the cracked pavement as Alex helped Mrs. Chen carry her heavy bag of supplies back to her apartment. The old woman had twisted her ankle the week before and still limped badly, but the Dominators did not care about human injuries when it came to ration collection. Lucy walked beside them, chattering about the pictures she planned to draw later. She had discovered that the red dust made good paint when mixed with water, and she spent hours creating colorful murals on the sides of abandoned buildings. The aliens never bothered to stop her. Art seemed to be beneath their notice. "Alex, you are too good to this old lady," Mrs. Chen said in her accented English. She had been a teacher before the invasion, and now she helped organize the informal school that met in secret in different basements around the settlement. "Mama used to say, 'Helping others helps yourself,'" Alex replied, adjusting his grip on the heavy bag. Inside were precious medical supplies that Mrs. Chen distributed to families with sick children. The Dominators provided basic nutrition, but no health care beyond keeping humans alive and working. They were halfway across the main square when the patrol appeared. 4 massive shapes emerged from the shadows between buildings, their heavy boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. Alex recognized Commander Brutok immediately, the largest of the group with deep scars running across his face and arms. Battle trophies, according to the whispered stories. The patrol was not supposed to be here at this time. Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the knowledge that changes in routine usually meant trouble for humans. Mrs. Chen's grip tightened on Alex's arm. "Walk slower," she whispered. "Do not draw attention," but it was too late. Lucy had stopped walking entirely and stood staring at the approaching aliens with open fascination. She had never seen Commander Brutok up close before, and her young mind was processing the intricate patterns of scars and armor that covered his massive frame. "Lucy," Alex called softly, but his sister was already moving. She took 3 steps toward the patrol before Alex could catch her. In her excitement, she bumped directly into Commander Brutok's leg, bouncing off the alien warrior like a small ball hitting a wall. The entire square fell silent. Humans who had been moving about their business froze in place, understanding instinctively that something terrible was about to happen. Even the usual sounds of the settlement seemed to stop as everyone waited to see how the most feared Dominator would respond to physical contact from a human. "Child." Commander Brutok looked down at Lucy with glowing red eyes. His scarred face twisted into what might have been surprise, then hardened into the familiar mask of authority. He had been conducting occupation duties for over 30 years across dozens of worlds. He knew exactly how to handle this situation. The commander activated his fear projection implants. The biotechnology sent waves of primal terror designed to trigger the deepest survival instincts of any living creature. Around the square, humans began backing away as the invisible field of dread expanded outward. Some actually ran. Others simply sank to their knees, overwhelmed by artificially induced panic. Lucy stumbled backward, her face pale and confused. She did not understand what was happening, but knew something was very wrong. Tears began forming in her eyes as the fear field washed over her young nervous system. Alex stepped between his sister and the alien commander. The projection hit him with full force, waves of terror that should have sent him running or left him paralyzed on the ground. His mind filled with images of death and destruction, with the primal certainty that he was facing an apex predator that could end his life without effort. But Alex had been afraid before. He had been afraid when the ships first appeared in the sky. He had been afraid when soldiers took his parents away. He had been afraid every morning when he woke up not knowing if his family would survive another day. And he had learned that fear was just another feeling, like hunger or tiredness. It told you something about your situation, but it did not have to control your choices. Alex looked up at Commander Brutok and smiled. Not the terrified grimace of someone trying to appease a predator, but a genuine warm smile of the kind he used to give his parents when they came home from work. A smile that recognized the person behind the fear and the anger and the weapons. The effect on Commander Brutok was immediate and profound. In 30 years of warfare, conquering species across half the galaxy, no being had ever responded to his fear projection with anything other than terror or rage. His implants were military-grade technology designed to work on any sentient species. They had never failed before. The commander deactivated his projectors and stared at the small human boy. Around the square, the artificial fear began to fade and people slowly stood up or stopped running. But their attention remained fixed on the impossible scene, a 12-year-old human child standing calmly before the most dangerous predator they had ever encountered. "You are not afraid," Commander Brutok said finally. His voice came out as a low growl, but Alex could hear something else underneath it. Confusion, perhaps even curiosity. "I was scared," Alex replied honestly. "But being scared does not mean I have to be mean to you." The words hit Brutok like a physical blow. In his entire military career, across countless worlds and species, no one had ever suggested that his fearsome appearance might be connected to meanness rather than strength. The concept was so foreign to Dominator thinking that he struggled to process it. Lucy, recovered from the fear projection, moved to stand beside her brother. She looked up at the massive alien with the same curious expression Alex wore. "Are you sad?" she asked innocently. "You look sad." Commander Brutok had no response to that. He turned and walked away, his patrol following in confused silence. Behind them, the square slowly returned to normal activity, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something unprecedented. Mrs. Chen hurried over to the children, her face pale with worry and amazement. "Alex," she whispered, "what did you just do?" Alex took Lucy's hand and picked up Mrs. Chen's supply bag. "I smiled," he said simply. Mama always said smiling was the fastest way to make friends. As they walked away, none of them noticed Commander Brutok watching from the shadows between buildings, his scarred face showing an expression that had not appeared there in decades, doubt. Word traveled fast in a settlement as small as Haven's Rest. By evening, everyone knew about the boy who had smiled at Commander Brutok and lived to tell about it. The story grew with each telling, but Alex noticed that people looked at him differently now. Not with fear for his safety, but with something that looked almost like hope. 3 days after the incident, Mrs. Park stopped Alex on his way to collect water rations. Her baby had finally stopped crying constantly, sleeping peacefully in her arms for the first time in weeks. "My grandmother used to tell stories," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no dominators were nearby, about people who could see the good in others, even when everyone else saw only monsters. She said those people could change the world just by refusing to hate. Alex did not know what to say to that, so he just smiled, the same easy smile he had given Commander Brutok. Mrs. Park's eyes filled with tears, but they were not sad tears. The changes started small. Old Pete, who ran the black market trade in spare parts and medicine, stopped charging desperate families extra for life-saving supplies. Maria, who had not spoken to anyone since her husband was taken, began helping at the informal school. Children started playing games again instead of just sitting quietly in corners. Even more surprisingly, some of the younger dominators began acting differently too. The nervous guard at the market checkpoint stopped gripping his weapon so tightly when families approached. Another alien soldier was seen helping an elderly human man who had fallen down carrying heavy supplies, though he looked around nervously afterward as if afraid of being caught showing kindness. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Lieutenant Voss, Commander Brutok's second-in-command, watched the growing confidence among the humans with deep concern. He had served in 7 occupation campaigns and knew that hope was more dangerous to military control than any weapon. "The humans are becoming difficult to manage," Voss reported during a private meeting with his commander. "Their compliance scores have dropped 15% this week. They are taking longer to respond to orders and showing less fear during interrogations. Commander Brutok stood at the window of their command post, looking out over the settlement. He had been doing that more often lately, watching the daily routines of the humans they controlled. Are they organizing resistance activities? No, sir. That is what makes this so concerning. They are not preparing for violence or rebellion. They are just different, more like they were before we arrived, but without the initial shock and terror. The commander remembered the boy's smile and the girl's innocent question about whether he was sad. In his military training, he had studied the psychology of conquered populations. Fear, anger, despair, and finally resignation. Those were the expected stages. What was happening in Haven's Rest did not fit any of the established patterns. Dr. Elena worked in the settlement's makeshift medical clinic, one of the few humans allowed to move freely between districts because her skills were useful to the occupying forces. She had been a xenopsychologist before the invasion, specializing in interspecies communication and behavior. Now she spent her days treating injuries and illnesses, but her scientific mind never stopped analyzing the situation around her. The day after Alex's confrontation with Commander Brutok, Elena had noticed immediate changes in her patients. People who had been suffering from stress-related symptoms began showing improvement. Sleep disorders decreased. Even physical healing seemed to accelerate as mental health improved. It's remarkable, she told her assistant Ben quietly as they organized medical supplies. Human psychology is far more resilient than most species realize. We evolved alongside predators much more dangerous than these dominators, and we developed coping mechanisms they cannot understand. Ben, a former engineer who now helped with medical equipment, looked up from his work. What kind of mechanisms? Social bonding under stress, finding meaning in suffering, maintaining hope despite overwhelming odds. Most species either fight or flee when confronted with superior force. Humans do something else entirely. We adapt and endure while planning for a better future. Elena had been conducting informal observations of both human and dominator behavior since the occupation began. What she was seeing now confirmed theories she had developed years ago about humanity's unique psychological profile. Look at Alex, she continued. A 12-year-old child faced down their most feared commander, not with aggression or submission, but with genuine curiosity and compassion. That response is completely outside their experience. They literally do not have psychological categories for it. Meanwhile, in the Dominator command ship orbiting New Terra, High Command was receiving disturbing reports from multiple occupied worlds. The incident with the human child was not unique. Across the Empire, conquered populations were beginning to show similar patterns of resilience and quiet resistance. General Korax studied the reports with growing unease. The hegemony standard occupation protocols were failing for the first time in centuries. Not through violent rebellion, which they could easily crush, but through something far more insidious. The conquered species were simply refusing to break completely. Humans appear to possess psychological defense mechanisms we have not encountered before, reported his chief analyst. Traditional fear-based control methods are showing decreased effectiveness over time rather than increased compliance. Explain, General Korax growled. Instead of becoming more fearful and obedient as intended, human populations are adapting to our presence. They maintain social structures, continue caring for their young and elderly, and show remarkable emotional recovery even after traumatic events. Most concerning, they seem able to maintain hope and planning for the future even under severe oppression. Back in Haven's Rest, Alex continued his daily routine of helping neighbors and caring for his sister. But now other children began following his example. They stopped hiding when patrols passed by. They looked directly at Dominator guards instead of staring at the ground. They even began greeting the aliens with polite good mornings and thank yous when receiving rations. The psychological effect on the occupying forces was profound. Soldiers trained for decades to maintain emotional distance from conquered populations found themselves seeing the humans as individuals rather than subjects to be controlled. Some began experiencing what their medics could only classify as stress disorders: doubt about their mission, difficulty sleeping, and unexpected emotional responses to human suffering. Commander Brutok found himself thinking about the boy's words at odd moments throughout the day. Being scared does not mean I have to be mean to you. The statement challenged everything he had been taught about strength, power, and military effectiveness. In Dominator culture, showing mercy was weakness. But the human child had shown something that was not mercy. It was simply recognition of shared existence. Late one evening, as Alex helped Grandmother Ruth prepare their small dinner, Lucy looked up from her drawings with a serious expression. "Alex," she said, "I think the aliens are lonely." "What makes you say that?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "They always travel together, but they never talk to each other like we do. And they never laugh or play games. That's what lonely people do. They stay close to others but never really connect." Alex considered this observation. His little sister was often wiser than adults gave her credit for. Maybe they just need someone to show them how to connect again. "Maybe," Lucy agreed, returning to her drawing. "But first they have to learn how to smile back." Outside their small apartment, the night patrols continued their rounds through the settlement. But for the first time since the occupation began, some of the guards found themselves looking at the warm lights in human windows not with suspicion, but with something that might have been longing. Commander Brutok had made a decision that would have horrified his superiors. He began watching the humans not as subjects to be controlled, but as puzzles to be solved. Every morning for 2 weeks he had observed their routines from concealed positions around the settlement. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about conquered populations. The humans shared food even when they barely had enough for themselves. Parents would go hungry to feed their children, and children would save portions of their rations for elderly neighbors. This behavior made no logical sense from a survival perspective, yet it seemed to make the entire community stronger rather than weaker. Yesterday, he had watched a group of human children playing in the ruins of what used to be a park. They had created games using broken pieces of concrete and metal, laughing and running despite living under military occupation. When a younger child fell and scraped her knee, the others immediately stopped their play to comfort her. No adult had to tell them to do this. They simply did it naturally. Most confusing of all was their response to Dominator presence. Instead of the expected pattern of increasing fear and compliance, the humans seemed to be growing more confident each day. They still followed orders and stayed within permitted areas, but they did so without the proper attitude of defeat and submission. Dr. Vex, the hegemony's leading expert on occupation psychology, arrived on New Terra with a team of specialists to investigate the anomaly. She set up her equipment in the command center and began conducting detailed behavioral analysis of the human population. "Commander," she said after reviewing 3 days of surveillance footage, "your reports were accurate but incomplete. This is not simply unusual behavior. This represents a completely unknown psychological profile." Brutok stood behind her, watching monitors that showed humans going about their daily activities. On screen, Alex was helping an elderly man repair a broken window while Lucy drew pictures on the sidewalk nearby. "Explain the significance," Brutok requested. Dr. Vex pointed to various scenes on the monitors. "Observe their stress responses. When faced with uncertainty or threat, most species either become aggressive or withdraw into defensive behaviors. These humans do neither. They increase social bonding and cooperative activities. They become more human, not less." She switched to a recording from the medical clinic where Dr. Elena was treating patients. Their injured and sick receive care not just from medical personnel but from the entire community. Families take turns helping with childcare, food preparation, and emotional support. This level of social cooperation typically only occurs in species that have not yet developed individual survival instincts. But humans are clearly intelligent and individualistic, Brutok observed. They make personal choices and pursue individual goals. Exactly. That is what makes this so unprecedented. They have evolved both strong individual intelligence and powerful group bonding mechanisms. When stressed, they do not choose between personal survival and group welfare. They find ways to strengthen both. Simultaneously, the investigation team spent days documenting human behaviors that had no equivalent in other species. They recorded families singing together in the evenings, neighbors organizing informal schools for children, and communities creating art and music using salvaged materials. None of these activities served any practical survival purpose, yet they clearly improved mental health and social cohesion. Most disturbing to the Dominator observers was the humans' treatment of their captors. Unlike other conquered species that showed either hatred or fearful submission, humans seemed genuinely curious about their occupiers as individuals. Some even attempted to engage guards in conversation, asking questions about Dominator homeworlds, family structures, and cultural practices. 3 weeks into the investigation, Dr. Vex made a discovery that changed everything. She was reviewing recordings of Alex's daily activities when she noticed something in his behavioral patterns that she had missed before. "Commander, you need to see this," she called urgently. Brutok joined her at the monitor where she had isolated footage of Alex's interactions with various Dominators over the past month. Watch his approach to each encounter. Notice his body language, eye contact patterns, and vocal tones. As the recordings played, Brutok saw what Dr. Vex had discovered. Alex was not simply being polite or trying to appease his captors. He was actively trying to understand them as individuals. His expressions showed genuine interest, not fear or calculation. He responded to each Dominator differently, as if he had recognized something unique in each one. "This child is conducting his own form of psychological analysis," Dr. Vex explained. "But unlike our scientific approach, he is trying to understand who we are rather than what we might do. He sees us as people worthy of curiosity rather than problems to be solved or threats to be managed." The implications hit Brutok like a physical blow. If humans naturally tried to understand their captors as individuals, then every interaction was potentially changing both species. The occupation was not just controlling humans, it was exposing Dominators to human psychological influence. "Doctor," Brutok said slowly, "what happens to a species that has suppressed emotional bonding for military efficiency when exposed to a species that actively seeks emotional connection even with enemies?" Dr. Vex looked at him with an expression he had never seen on a Dominator face before. Uncertainty mixed with something that might have been fear. "I do not know, Commander. That scenario is not covered in any of our psychological warfare manuals." That evening, Brutok found himself walking alone through the settlement during his off-duty hours. It was against regulations, but he needed to see the humans in their natural state, when they thought no one was watching. What he observed would have been impossible to believe without witnessing it firsthand. Families gathered around small fires, sharing stories and jokes despite having little to celebrate. Parents read to children from handmade books created from salvaged paper. Teenagers had formed a choir that practiced quietly in basement rooms, their harmonious voices carrying hope through the thin walls. At one point, he paused outside a window where he could hear Alex reading to Lucy from a picture book about animals on Earth. The boy's voice was gentle and patient as he explained each creature to his sister, helping her understand the world they had left behind. "This is a dog," Alex was saying. "They were humans' best friends. They would protect families and play with children and always be happy to see you when you came home." "Do you think we will ever see a real dog?" Lucy asked. "Maybe someday," Alex replied. "But until then, we can remember them and tell stories about them and keep them alive in our hearts." Brutok had conquered dozens of worlds, but he had never encountered anything like this. A species that maintained hope and beauty and love even in the darkest circumstances. More unsettling, he found himself wondering what it would feel like to have someone happy to see him when he came home, or to have a family to read stories to in the evening. For the first time in his military career, Commander Brutok began to question not just his orders, but the entire philosophy that had shaped his existence, and he suspected he was not the only one. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning, when Lucy developed a high fever that would not break. Alex had found her burning with temperature in her small bed, delirious and barely able to speak. Grandmother Ruth's face went pale as she felt the child's forehead, recognizing the signs of the illness that had claimed several children in the settlement over the past month. The human medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Dr. Elena had been rationing antibiotics carefully, but there were simply not enough to treat everyone who needed them. The Dominators provided basic nutrition and shelter to keep their workforce alive, but advanced medical care was considered unnecessary for subject populations. Alex knew the rules. Humans could request medical assistance for life-threatening conditions, but such requests required approval from a commanding officer. The approval process typically took 3 to 5 days, and Lucy might not have that long. Instead of going through official channels, Alex did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He walked directly to the command post and asked to speak with Commander Brutok personally. The guards at the entrance looked at the 12-year-old boy as if he had lost his mind. Humans did not request private audiences with high-ranking officers. Such presumption would normally result in immediate detention or worse. But word of Alex's previous encounter with the commander had spread through the ranks, and the guards found themselves uncertain about how to respond. One of them, the same nervous young soldier from the market checkpoint, made a decision that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. He contacted Commander Brutok directly. Brutok agreed to see the boy, though he could not have explained why even to himself. He found Alex waiting in the small reception area, sitting calmly despite the obvious worry in his eyes. "My sister is very sick," Alex said without preamble. "She needs medicine that we do not have. I know you could help her if you wanted to." The directness of the request caught Brutok off guard. No conquered subject had ever approached him with such simple honesty, without begging or bargaining or offering some form of payment. The boy was simply stating facts and trusting that Brutok would choose to act on them. "Why do you think I would help?" Brutok asked, genuinely curious about the answer. "Because you have a heart," Alex replied. "Everyone does, even if they forgot about it for a while." The words hit Brutok with unexpected force. In Dominator culture, emotional responses were considered weaknesses to be eliminated through training and discipline. The concept of a heart, of feeling compassion for others, was not just discouraged but actively suppressed. Yet as he looked at this human child who had lost his parents, lived under military occupation, and now faced losing his sister, Brutok saw no hatred or despair. Alex's eyes held the same genuine care and hope they had shown during their first encounter. Even facing personal tragedy, the boy still believed that others could choose to be good. "You do not know me," Brutok said slowly. "I have destroyed cities and conquered worlds. I have caused more suffering than you can imagine. Why would you trust me with something so important to you?" Alex considered this seriously before answering. "Because that was before. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose who you want to be. The past does not have to decide the future." The simple wisdom of those words shook Brutok to his core. In all his years of military philosophy and strategic training, no one had ever suggested that identity was a choice rather than a fixed condition. The idea that he could choose to be someone different in this moment was both terrifying and liberating. "What if I refuse?" Brutok asked. "What if I tell you that alien lives matter more than human ones, and I will not waste resources on your sister?" "Then I would be sad," Alex said honestly, "but I would still believe you could choose differently tomorrow." Brutok stared at the boy for a long moment, feeling something shift inside his chest, a sensation he had not experienced since childhood. Before military conditioning had taught him to suppress such responses. Without fully understanding his own motivations, he authorized the immediate transfer of advanced medical supplies to the human clinic. Lucy recovered within 2 days, her fever breaking as the alien antibiotics fought off the infection. But the impact of Alex's visit to the command post rippled through both communities in ways no one had anticipated. Other humans began approaching Dominator personnel directly with problems and requests, not with the expected fear and submission, but with the same honest trust Alex had shown. They asked for help fixing broken equipment, mediated disputes between families, and even sought advice on technical problems. More surprisingly, many Dominators found themselves responding positively to these approaches. Guards who had been trained to maintain emotional distance began learning the names of the humans in their sectors. Soldiers started bringing small gifts, extra food rations, salvaged toys for children, even hand-carved decorations, to families they had gotten to know. Lieutenant Voss watched these developments with growing alarm. "Commander," he reported during their weekly briefing, "discipline is breaking down among the troops. They are forming personal relationships with the subject population. This is contrary to all occupation protocols." But Brutok was experiencing his own transformation. The more he observed human behavior, the more he questioned the assumptions that had guided his entire career. He began reading philosophy and psychology texts from the ship's library, trying to understand what the humans had shown him about the nature of strength, courage, and leadership. One evening, as he walked through the settlement during his unofficial rounds, Alex approached him near the old playground where Lucy often drew her pictures. "Commander," the boy said, Can I ask you something? Brutok nodded, curious what new insight the child might offer. Do you have a family? People who care about you? The question struck at the heart of Dominator military culture. Soldiers were removed from their birth families at young ages and raised in communal barracks to prevent emotional attachments that might compromise their effectiveness. Personal relationships were seen as weaknesses that enemies could exploit. No, Brutok said finally. We do not form such connections. Alex looked genuinely sad at this response. That sounds very lonely. Loneliness is inefficient, Brutok replied automatically, repeating doctrine he had learned decades ago. But even as he said the words, they felt hollow and meaningless. Maybe, Alex said thoughtfully, but love makes you stronger, not weaker. When I take care of Lucy, I am not just helping her. I am becoming the kind of person I want to be. And when other people care about you, you have more reasons to be brave and good. As Brutok walked back to his quarters that night, he found himself imagining what it would feel like to have someone who cared whether he came home safely, someone who would be happy to see him not because of his rank or achievements, but simply because he existed. For the first time in his adult life, he wondered if strength might come from connection rather than isolation. The transformation was accelerating on both sides. Humans and Dominators were beginning to see each other not as occupiers and subjects, but as individuals with hopes, fears, and the capacity for growth. But change on this scale could not remain hidden from higher authorities forever. High Command was already demanding explanations for the anomalous reports from New Terra. Soon, they would send forces to investigate personally. And when they did, everyone who had been touched by this quiet revolution would face consequences that could reshape the entire galaxy. The orders arrived on a cold morning that felt too ordinary for the magnitude of what they contained. Commander Brutok read the encrypted message twice before the full meaning settled into his consciousness. High Command had lost patience with the anomalous reports from New Terra. The human settlement was to be eliminated completely. Every man, woman, and child. The official reason was listed as contamination, risk to military personnel and potential spread of psychological warfare tactics to other occupied territories. But Brutok understood the real motivation. The humans had done something far more dangerous than rebelling. They had shown that another way of living was possible. He stood at his office window, looking out over Haven's Rest as its inhabitants went about their morning routines. Children walked to the informal schools that had sprung up in basement rooms. Adults shared breakfast and planned their work assignments. Elderly residents sat in small groups telling stories and watching over toddlers who played with toys made from salvaged materials. It looked like a community rather than a prison camp. Somehow, despite military occupation and resource scarcity, the humans had created something that resembled home. Lieutenant Voss entered without knocking, his expression grim. Commander, the orbital bombardment ships will be in position within 6 hours. High Command requests confirmation of target coordinates and civilian evacuation status. Civilian evacuation status? Brutok repeated. There will be no evacuation, sir. The orders are explicit. Complete elimination with no survivors to carry contamination to other worlds. Brutok looked at his second-in-command, seeing the same doubts in Voss's eyes that had been growing in his own. Lieutenant, in your professional opinion, do you consider these humans to be a military threat? Voss hesitated before answering. No, sir. They have shown no signs of organizing armed resistance or developing weapons capabilities. Their influence on our troops has been unusual, but not violent or subversive in traditional terms. Then what exactly are we afraid of? The question hung in the air between them. Both officers knew the answer, though neither wanted to speak it aloud. They were afraid of hope. They were afraid of kindness. They were afraid of a way of life that made their own existence seem hollow and meaningless by comparison. At that moment, as if summoned by fate, Alex appeared outside the command post. He was not alone. Lucy walked beside him, along with several other children from the settlement. They carried something that looked like a banner made from salvaged cloth. Brutok watched through the window as the children approached the entrance. The guards looked uncertain, unsure how to respond to what was clearly not a protest or aggressive action, but something else entirely. Sir, one of the guards reported over the communication system, the human children are requesting permission to present you with something. They say it is a gift. Against all military protocols and common sense, Brutok found himself authorizing the children's entry. They filed into his office quietly, their faces serious but not fearful. Alex stepped forward as their apparent spokesperson. "Commander," he said formally, "we wanted to thank you for helping Lucy when she was sick, and for all the small kindnesses your soldiers have shown us. We made something for you." The children unfurled their banner, revealing a carefully painted scene that took Brutok's breath away. It showed humans and dominators working together, building houses, tending gardens, teaching children, and sharing meals. At the center of the image was a figure that was unmistakably Brutok himself, but painted not as a fearsome warrior but as a protector, watching over families of both species. "We know you have to follow orders," Alex continued, "and we know those orders might not always be good for us. But we wanted you to know that we see who you really are underneath all that armor and training. You are not just a soldier. You are a person who can choose to be kind." Lucy stepped forward and added her own small voice. "We drew you smiling because we think you would look nice if you smiled more." The innocence and sincerity of the gesture shattered something inside Brutok that had been cracking for weeks. These children, facing annihilation in less than 6 hours, had spent their time creating art to thank their executioner for moments of compassion. They had seen past his weapons and his scars to imagine a version of himself that he had never dared to consider. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. "This is beautiful." The children beamed at his approval, then filed out as politely as they had entered. Alex lingered for a moment at the doorway. "Commander," he said quietly, "whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you has been one of the good things about living here. You helped me understand that people can change if they want to. I hope someday you get the chance to be the person we see in that picture." After they left, Brutok stood alone with their gift, staring at the image of himself as a protector rather than a destroyer. Lieutenant Voss waited silently, understanding that his commander was facing a decision that would define not just his own future, but potentially the fate of 2 species, "Sir," Voss said finally. "The orbital platforms are requesting final target confirmation." Brutok looked at the painted banner, then out at the settlement where humans were living their lives with quiet dignity. Despite facing extinction, he thought about Alex's smile on that first day, and Lucy's innocent question about whether he was sad. He thought about Dr. Elena treating patients with supplies he had provided, and about the children's choir practicing in basement rooms. He thought about strength and weakness, about order and chaos, about the difference between conquest and protection. Then he made his choice. Brutok activated his command console and began typing orders that would be considered treason by every military standard he had ever known. He disabled the orbital defense grid that would have prevented human ships from escaping. He transmitted detailed intelligence about hegemony fleet positions and patrol schedules to the human resistance network. Most importantly, he sent a galaxy-wide broadcast on open channels, describing what he had witnessed on New Terra. To all forces of the hegemony, his recorded message began, and to all conquered peoples across the galaxy, "I am Commander Brutok of the Dominator Corps, and I have discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about strength and victory." The message described the psychological revolution he had witnessed, how humans had responded to occupation, not with hatred or despair, but with increased compassion and hope, how they had maintained their humanity under impossible circumstances and, in doing so, had awakened humanity in their captors. True strength, his broadcast concluded, does not come from the ability to destroy others, but from the capacity to help them become their best selves. The humans have taught us that conquest creates only temporary control, but connection creates lasting change. Today I choose connection over conquest. I choose hope over fear. I choose to become the person a human child believed I could be. The effects were immediate and far-reaching. Across the hegemony, Dominator soldiers who had been struggling with similar doubts found courage in their commander's example. Conquered populations began openly defying their occupiers, not with violence but with the same quiet dignity humans had shown. Some Dominators joined the resistance movements, while others simply refused to follow orders that required cruelty. On New Terra, evacuation ships arrived within hours, guided by the intelligence Brutok had provided. As families boarded the transports that would take them to safety, Alex found Commander Brutok standing alone near the old playground where this revolution had begun. "You chose," Alex said simply, offering the smile that had started everything. "Yes," Brutok replied, and for the first time in his adult life he smiled back. Not the grim expression of a predator, but the genuine warmth of someone who had finally understood what it meant to be truly strong. Years later, on a distant world where humans and reformed dominators built communities together, children would hear the story of the boy who smiled at a monster and saw a friend waiting to be born. They would learn that the greatest victories come not from defeating enemies, but from helping them discover they never needed to be enemies at all. And in schools across a dozen worlds, human and alien children alike would practice the lesson Alex had taught, that sometimes the most powerful weapon against hatred is simply refusing to hate in return.